Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Well, we just had our first ever online conference with Rocks and Stocks News. One of the sponsors of that conference, which you can find at Rocks and Stocks News /events. One of the sponsors was Sokoman Minerals, and we did quite a thorough dig deeper into the story of Sokoman. But then our friend Tim went and made some good news a couple of days after the conference was out. So I had to have him back on. He's a friend of the show. Tim, thank you very much for joining me today.
Glad to be back, Allan. This is getting to be a habit.
Well, I like these habits when you deliver headlines like Sokoman cuts high-grade gold in step-out drilling at Moosehead Project, and that the highlight hole was 4.2 meters of 64 grams per ton gold, including 1.2 meters of 223 grams per ton gold at South Pond. That's some pretty bonanza looking stuff, Tim.
Well, whoever said it, grade is king, was certainly correct. And, grade means all the difference. And when you combine that, Allan, with the fact that, this is only vertically 30 meters below surface. I mean, you can practically go out and pick the stuff up, right? It's amazing, really. And you know what? It's not the first time we've had grades like this, and in a different area than what people are used to us getting these types of grades in. I mean,
well, yeah, because most of your drilling to date has been up in the North Pond and near the resource. This stuff's what, 750 meters away from that or so?
It's not quite that far, Allan, maybe at the northern end of where we've drilled, but certainly from, say, the heart, if you want to call it that, of the mineralization, in the eastern trend, and even off to the side, the western trend, and there is a link there. I'll get to that in a second. We're probably 250 to 350 meters to the south of where, we've been, getting, more of our intercepts like this. So this is a very welcome news. Again, it's follow up just to remind people, these holes in the South Pond area are following up on a cluster of float originally found by prospectors working for Altius and Noranda back in the day. And we found an additional cluster of higher grade boulders, over an ounce. The material that the historical boulders, we call them, went anywhere from 2 to maybe 15 grams. But I mean, we're getting them a whole order of magnitude higher than that. Up to 157 grams in some of our float.
Well, that's a good sign.
Just nailing this thing, in the underground now, right? So it's real. It's not just a boulder that's traveled from God knows where, right?
Well, and in the famous words of one of my geologist mentors, he says, usually how things look really good at surface, and then you get deeper and they don't look as good. You guys have kind of flipped that scenario. You're getting better grades at depth than the sampling. So it's obviously a sign you guys had done some good sampling there, and it wasn't high grading the samples.
Oh, and these systems, they can be kind of variable in their grades, in terms of the nugget effect, which you'll get, right? And sometimes that works in your favor, and sometimes it doesn't. But we've now gotten grades over an ounce consistently in boulders, and now in the drilling. So to me, that's a pretty good indication that this is indeed a very good grade vein, at least, or part of the system, sort of thing. And as I mentioned, there's a link to the western trend in this. The modeling that's now showing us is that the mineralization we're getting at South Pond is very likely linked on the same feature as the western trend stuff, about 250, 240, 250 meters to the north. So with only 2 historical drill holes in between that gap. I mean, so we'll be up there for a little while.
On the map you shared with your news release, it looks like that west trend, there's a fault that goes through the west trend and continues down to these South Pond holes. Is that correct?
Yes, that will be the surface projection of that structure. So it's actually dipping a bit to the east, so it's actually going to the right-hand side of the page underneath the pond, sort of thing. And the eastern trend is actually if you can see enough of that, you'll see the eastern trend structure is actually behind all of the holes we're drilling. So, this is something else we got to look at now as well, is what's back behind us, So, I mean, there's going to be a lot of drilling down in this South Pond area, and not just on the one target. So it's quite exciting. And for now, Rig 1 will focus on the immediate South Pond area. We want to try and figure out what sort of a plunge or dip or rake this high grade material has. So we'll be around there for a few weeks. We'll probably punch in 6, 8, maybe 10 holes, depending on how things go. And then, maybe back it up and see if we can actually cut both of those trends in a hole, the east and the west with the longer hole just step back behind us, right? So.
Okay, and now I see the east trend you're talking about. That fault looks to be somewhat parallel to the western trend fault. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. There's kind of an anastomosing series of structures there, Allan, and it's kind of like a braided stream. Like they kind of go and they'll come close to one another, and then they'll sort of spread apart, sort of thing. So like a network of veins, sort of thing. But probably related at depth to to one major controlling structure.
They might come together as you get deeper. Now, Tim, is the belief that the plumbing system for the resource area and then this new South Pond stuff is the same plumbing system? And does the rock look the same, or what is that? What can you tell me about that?
It's pretty much the same package of rocks, and just to caution everybody that we're not really in a resource sort of mode yet. We got to get a bunch more holes in, but eventually, yes. I mean, there will be something done there. But no, the plumbing system seems very, very strong and robust, and as long as the structure's there, there's no reason why we shouldn't expect to see these zones. Now they could be a series of chutes, or certainly not one big plane of quartz that's sitting in there. No, it's not that simple. I wish it was, but it's not. So as we see at Fosterville, I mean, the Swan Zone is like 50 meters in strike length. It's not huge, right? But it goes to depth, right? So you got to figure out that plunge, and sometimes with a little complication, it could waver to the east in a dip and maybe back to the west. So it's going to take a little bit of meticulous drilling there, but we'll do our best to figure it out, Allan.
You're telling me Fosterville only has a strike of 50 meters? How many ounces of gold are in that strike if you follow it down?
Well, I don't think they know yet. I don't think they've cut it off, right? It's one of these things. That's why it's called a chute, right? Or like a rod, basically. It's like, and it may, and who knows, the dimensions may have changed. But in the literature I read from a technical report, that's on file, the Swan Zone, 50 meters in strike length, 4 to 15 meters thick. But it's the down plunge direction that gives them the tonnage, right? It's not 1,000,000 tons, but I mean, at the grade, there's a couple million ounces, right? So
it's a jewelry box the whole way down.
Yes, exactly.
So the real key is to find that strike, find the dip, and keep following it to depth to find those jewelry boxes.
Again, I just want to reiterate how difficult these things are. I mean, Fosterville was a mine for how long? Before it was just an average run-of-the-mill mine, and suddenly this, like you called it, a jewelry box, which is exactly what it is somewhere in the heart of this system. So, we know the Moosehead structure, runs the length of the property. We have VG in our drilling and historic drilling over a 2-kilometer strike length, right? So anywhere in there, and a lot of it is not really drilled off in any great detail, so anywhere in there, you could have many, high grade chutes plunging off in maybe the same direction, maybe in different directions. I mean, look at our footwall splay. I mean, that's parallel to all of our previous drilling. I mean, we only got it kind of by accident, but I mean, I'm not afraid to admit that. You need a bit of luck in this business from time to time, right?
A lot of luck.
So, until you drill, and drill enough holes, you never really know.
Well, it's not lost on me that you're talking about Fosterville. I mean, that's a spectacular mine. It really made Kirkland Lake into the household name it is. And to have something that you can realistically talk about in the same context is not lost on me. Another thing that wasn't lost on me, Tim, is a lot of times when I see good drill results with bonanza grades, there's a fair amount of smearing. Just off the top of my head, it looks like you probably had in addition to 2 meters of really sweet grade, you probably had residual grades that, some people would be waving their arms and hands about. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. There was a 1.2 meter section of what we call the strongest part of the veining. It was divided into 2 samples. One was, I think, about 300 grams, and I think that was about 3/4 of a meter of, so there was some a little bit of gold supporting it in the down drop side, and then there was a couple of anomalous samples, and then I think a couple of half-gram samples above that. So it's pretty typical of what we see there. There's the structure there is 4 to 5, 6 meters wide. Sometimes it occurs as 2 or 3 discrete VG bearing veins. Sometimes it's one bigger one, but it's with those variabilities, it's the size and the tenor of the system that remains constant, right? So
because you're going to mine that whole thing, and that's
exactly
not going to be complete dilution, right? You don't have a 3/4 of a foot a high grade that you got to spread out and do a lot of dilution to get to it.
No, that's right. I mean, the strongest part of that is that 1.2, and that's almost the entire vein, right? Is that length, right? So, well, there was a couple of pictures floating around, I think, maybe on Twitter of some of that gold. So, yeah, it's there. You can see it, right?
Yeah.
So,
Tim, you're really understating that. That was some beautiful looking rock you showed with some nice looking VG. And, I got to caution people, because a lot of times when you see VG, it may not always show up in your assay results, but that was some spectacular looking rock that you shared. What's your Twitter handle? Is it at Sokoman Minerals? Is it at Sokoman Minerals?
Geez, you know what? I don't know what it is, because I don't do most or any of the Twitter work, right? That's the
for the Twitter people, just do a search for Sokoman, and it'll come up there, and you scroll down and you'll see some now, what I also noticed was it was closely associated with some other minerals. It wasn't just in the quartz. What was that other mineral that it seemed to be associated with?
Well, where you saw the gold in that, almost like there was a little fold, you see that? That's some of the stylolytic banding, right, that you see there. And basically those are pressure cracks that develop under stress in the quartz vein, and it's actually where the vein actually started to melt again, sort of thing. And it's along these things that you get oftentimes you get very, very fine sulfides, pyrite, belangerite, sometimes a little bit of arsenopyrite, and minerals like chlorite and cerussite. So it's along those bands that you generally see the gold. They almost occur like little droplets along those stylolites. And of course, stylolytic banding is also a very characteristic feature at, guess where? It's the F word.
So now, when they were, I don't know how much you know about the exploration. Are those sulfides, are they helpful in targeting to try to focus in on the highest grade, the bonanza stuff?
Yes, well, there's a suite of sulfides that's definitely more strongly associated with the higher grade gold. Allan, that's a very good point. Like typically, if we get a vein that only has arsenopyrite and pyrite in it, we can probably look at getting anywhere from, well, up to say 10 grams, sort of thing, right? It's almost an order of magnitude lower than what we'd get if we had the magic package. Seems to be sphalerite, belangerite, and a little bit of chalcopyrite, sometimes a little bit of galena, but generally it's the sphalerite and the belangerite, and of course pyrite. Pyrite's ubiquitous in these systems. That you get your better grade. So yeah, so the zinc and the antimony are probably the two most important sort of pathfinder elements outside of gold itself, of course.
Okay, so I always try to be mindful of the fact, Tim, that we're trying to talk to investors here. So tell the folks a little bit about how that you know, the system brings those hotter fluids. They come with the sulfides. Try to break it down into investor speak a little for. We were getting a little in the weeds on sulfides and associated mineralization.
Well, if I can, and if my geology background is strong enough, let me see. Well, first of all, you need a structure, right? You know, unless you're looking for placer gold in a gravel in a riverbed.
Because that structure is the plumbing that is the pathway of least resistance for the fluids to come up.
Absolutely. So you need a structure first, and preferably a deeper one, because the deeper your structure goes, the more rock basically you're tapping to get just particulate amounts of gold. I mean, you're talking ppb gold, but over a huge volume, because it's a difficult concept for a lot of people to understand, even geologists. You know that fluids can move through a rock, but they do. You know, it's just one of these forces of nature. You know that creates these mineral deposits, and you know, over time and over many years and lots of pressure, these fluids basically get focused up, because that's just a natural way. It's almost like watching the water boiling in a pot, you know, the slow boil, that rolling boil, you know, and it all comes up to the surface, right? So, and if it gets to the surface, well, then you have an epithermal type deposit. These vein systems form at much deeper levels, right? Anywhere from, you know, a half a kilometer down to a few kilometers depth. So, you know, they stay capped, right? So they stay under pressure. And that's why sometimes you see a little bit of what they call the vuggy texture, is where you get these little bursts of release, right? And it's kind of like opening a drink, you know, or a pop can, right? You know, everything sort of comes out, right? And things precipitate out. So, yeah, so you need a structure, you need a plumbing system, right? You know, something to push that. You know, it could be a granite body or something like that, or you know, any type of intrusive. And you know, you need source rocks are important as well, and some source rocks are more enriched in others than in gold. So you know, it's just a whole bunch. I mean, to form an ore body, I mean, you know, a lot of things has to fall into place for you, right?
And another important factor is that those associated sulfides are indicative that you have a long-lived system and that it's a deep source where that's all coming from. Is that correct?
Yes, and you know, but again, it depends on your source rocks, right? I mean, all the metals come from, you know, somewhere deeper, right? You know, so, and you know, it depends on what's in those rocks. If you have more mafic rocks, then you're going to get more copper and things like that in them. If they're more felsic rocks, you're probably going to get more zinc and things like that. So it's you know, it's all a very complicated process that's not often easy to explain, other than with a good drill hole.
Well, sometimes I think that people, they have a habit of, not a lot of investors, sadly, in this space don't really know how to interpret what this all means. And, you're a very well-trained and well-experienced geologist, and, you're also the kind of guy that's not blowing smoke. And to use the reference to Fosterville is not used lightly. Am I correct in that?
Well, that's right. I mean, and you know, it also pays, you know, in our careers, most geologists, you know, do travel around a bit. You know, we get a chance to work here and there and everything. It's kind of probably, I call it the best job in the world in my mind. I mean, you know, where else can you go stay in nice places and eat lots of nice food and get paid while you're there, sort of thing, right? You know, sort of thing. So, but you know, just you know, going back to drilling and stuff. I mean, it's you know, you can't stress enough how important it is to, you know, really understand what it is you're looking for. You know, and as I mentioned several times, and even in press releases, you know, we drill for structure first, because unless you get a structure, you're probably not going to get any gold, right? So, and not every drill hole is going to give you, you know, bonanza grade or any grade for that matter. You know, there's good holes and there's bad holes and there's intermediate holes, but you
But
know.
even the bad holes, Tim, can only be inches. I mean, when you're talking about strike lengths of 50 to 100 meters, you could be inches off and a few inches more that way, and you've got a jewelry box. So, that's one thing that I've really tried to stress to people when I talk about Sokoman, is that you guys are trying to understand the system. And if you understand that system, it's not going to take very long to add up a lot of ounces when you're talking about these grades.
No, and you know what, Alan, you just thank you for that, because early on in phase 6, I think it was maybe our second hole, maybe our third hole, hole 100 maybe, or 110. You know, we hit, it was just sample after sample after sample, this huge long string, tens of meters of anomalous gold, what we call anomalous gold, you know, up to 100, 200, 300 ppb. And, you know, to investors, you know, that may sound like, you know, a dead hole or not much, but just to your point, right, you know, we could have maybe just missed a high grade shoot by a meter, you know, and the fact that there's smoke around there, and I even said this, I think, in the press release, an earlier press release, that we're going to be back around there, right? Because where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So, you know, and you know, when you drill deeper holes, you know, you have to keep in mind, of course, that, you know, it costs a bit of money to get down there. So, you know, we may back away from that area for a while until we kind of figure out things maybe a little further along to the south or to the north, right? It just helps us all put together. So, you know, and that's why sometimes companies sort of jump around, right? You know, when they're drilling a target, they'll put a couple holes in and then they'll go somewhere else for a while. Well, you don't want to drill a hole where you don't want to drill a hole until you know that you don't need to drill that hole. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
Speaking
So,
of
you know,
drilling, let's
so the more information you have, you know, the smarter driller you are. So, you know, and sometimes it even means taking a break, you know, like take a week off, you know, send the drillers home, you know, whatever. Let's get our heads around this, because I mean, this is too important a story and too important to, you know, mess it up, because people are going to think if we're not drilling, you know, we're giving up or whatever. You know, that's not the case. You know, you have to think about these things. And with the delay in the, not the delay, but the normal, you know, the turnaround, and I dare say the word normal doesn't exist anymore, but you know, it takes a while sometimes, you know, to get your results. So you just have to stop, right? You know, you have to, because you don't always
but
see
you know,
gold.
Tim, there's one thing that I learned. I spent a lot of my career in diamond exploration, and there's one thing I learned. You find indicator minerals, they come from the same place as the diamonds.
Yeah.
You find diamonds, you have to do the right job to figure out what you've got, because that's a special situation. And you don't want to screw up a special situation. I think you guys got one here. Let's quickly talk about your current drilling, what you've got in the lab, and then looking forward a little bit.
Well, it's let me see. We've now drilled in this program, and this is, of course, going back to 2020, phase 6. I think 37 holes for just under 7,000 meters. I would say we've got, and without having the chart directly in front of me, you know, there's certainly a number of holes outstanding, you know, in terms of where they are. Now, clearly, we prioritize things, you know, and you know, the assays we put out yesterday were rush priority. And you know, it'd be nice to do that for all of our samples. But you know, if everybody did it, well, then we'd be right back to square one. First come, first serve. There's no one ahead of the line anymore. So anyway, but you know, I'd have to do the math, and what I'll do is I'll, and I don't want to say I don't know, because I'm not sure, which is different. And I'll let you know, and you can.
Okay, so it's fair to
put it
say
out.
there's holes pending,
Yes.
and you're currently drilling.
Yes.
And now you're getting more data to help focus your future drilling.
Yes, and just to remind people, of course, that Rig 2 is now on board and is underway with its first exploration hole testing. Let's see, it's hitting on all cylinders in terms of to check the boxes off for what you need. It's got float, high grade float. It's got good soil geochemistry. It's got our highest till geochemistry, and a beautiful little structure sitting there on the mag saying something's gone kinky here. So when you see kinks in the mag, that generally says, you know, something's happened. And so that hole is probably going to take another week to finish. It's going to probably a little deeper than most of our holes, but we did promise investors we'd be, you know, looking at this thing a little deeper in phase 6. And now that we've got Rig 2, you know, we can certainly start addressing some deeper shots at it. And again, drilling for structure first. We got to get that structure, and if we're lucky, we'll get a good hit in the hole. But if not, well, we'll hopefully be able to work backwards, you know, and see where maybe where we can focus to the whole for better success. But anyway, structure first, you know.
Got it. Thanks, Tim. I'm going to wrap it up here with a little bit of the value proposition. Thank you again, and congrats for hitting some more high grade on your old boyhood fishing hole.
Well, thank you, Allan. And like I said, I'll tally up what we got outstanding, and I'll forward it off to you, and you can pass it around.
Perfect. Thanks again, Tim. So, you know, folks, I always try to remember that I'm trying to talk to investors here. And what's most important, Tim talked a lot about what he's doing to unlock shareholder value and understand this project. But the big picture to me is that when he talks about Fosterville, and that you're talking about Fosterville in the context of drill results, the truth machine is indicating that they're looking at something like Fosterville. The company still has a very modest valuation. And if they are, and that's a big if, of course, we need more of the truth machine to tell us we're going in the right direction. But if that continues to prove out, this valuation is minuscule relative to where they will be if it looks like they've tagged a Fosterville 2.0. So I highly recommend you look at this company, do your homework. As always, my shows are for information purposes only, and it's really important for you to talk to your financial advisors and do your homework. I find that so many people look at these results and then they look at the market, and if the market says it was good, then it's good. If they didn't, well, then it's not so good. But that's not the way to make money in this business. It's understanding value. It's understanding valuation relative to potential. And you got to be careful about potential with a lot of companies, because a lot of times it's simple arm waving that doesn't have any reality based on the truth machine. That's what Sokoman has. They're looking for another Fosterville 2.0. Do your homework, and we'll keep you informed on this story, because Tim is a friend to the show, and we'll have more on Sokoman in the future. Stay tuned.